It started, like so many HOA sagas do, with a letter. About a month ago, every homeowner in our little condo community in California got the same reminder notice slipped under their doors and emailed for good measure. It was strict, almost military in tone. All trash must be placed inside a garbage can with a lid. Bags placed directly on the curb are a violation. Cans must only be out on designated collection days, between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. Violations are subject to immediate fines. The message was clear. The HOA had enough of residents casually tossing black plastic bags onto the curb, letting the crows and raccoons tear them open overnight. They wanted order. They wanted uniformity. And most of all, they wanted control. The irony? The rule itself wasn't new. It had always been in the CC and Rs, tucked away in the fine print. But people ignored it, and the board rarely enforced it. Until now. Suddenly, the HOA was on a crusade against loose trash bags. At first, people complied. Green and blue garbage cans lined the street like obedient soldiers. For once, trash day looked almost orderly. But then, a few sharp-eyed residents began noticing something strange. The loudest violator wasn't just any homeowner. It was a board member. The guy lived right next door to me. Let's call him Greg. 3 times a week, like clockwork, Greg would shuffle out to the curb carrying a single, sagging black plastic bag. No can, no lid, just plop, straight onto the street. He didn't even try to hide it. In fact, sometimes he'd toss it down while talking on the phone, as if daring anyone to say something. And the kicker? This was after the letter went out. The first time I saw it, I laughed bitterly. The second time, I took a photo. The third time, I caught my neighbor Janice nearly exploding. "This is unbelievable," she hissed, pointing at the bags slumped on the asphalt. "We just got fined last month for leaving our bin out 10 minutes late. And he's on the board. He gets away with this?" I shrugged, though my stomach churned with the same frustration. It's one set of rules for them, another for us. Janice wasn't satisfied. She marched over to Greg's bag, snapped 3 photos on her phone, and muttered, "Let's see what the board says now." Of course, we already knew what the board would say. At the next meeting in the clubhouse, Janice stood up, phone in hand, and presented her evidence. "This was taken outside Unit 47, she announced. 3 separate times. That's a board member's unit. Why are homeowners being fined for trash violations while your own colleague ignores the rules?" The room stirred. Heads turned toward Greg, who sat smugly at the front beside the other board members. Karen, the board president, coughed and shuffled her papers. "We, can't comment on individual cases." Janice's face flushed red. "You fined me $50 for leaving my can out until 6:15. But he drops a bare trash bag on the curb and nothing happens? That's not a case. That's hypocrisy." The murmurs grew louder. Someone shouted, "Double standards." Another, "Why bother with rules if they don't apply to you?" Greg leaned back, smirking. "Maybe mind your own trash." The room erupted. People began yelling over each other. Some shouted at Greg, others at Karen for defending him. Chairs scraped as residents stood, waving their violation notices in the air. One man slammed his fist on the table. "You fine us, but your buddy gets a free pass? Hell no." Greg snapped back. "Don't like it? Run for the board." That was the spark. A woman near the back screamed, "You're a joke, Greg. You think you're above the law." Greg stood suddenly, his chair clattering to the floor. He pointed a finger across the room. "Say that again, and see what happens." The woman's husband stood too, chest puffed, fists clenched. "What? You gonna hit my wife over a trash bag? For a second, it looked like they might actually come to blows. Two other residents rushed between them, shoving Greg back toward the board table. Papers went flying. Karen pounded her gavel desperately, shouting, "Order! Order!" But the room was chaos. The police weren't called that night, but the message was clear. This wasn't just about garbage anymore. This was about power. The next morning, I found a note tucked under my doormat. It was scrawled in messy handwriting, unsigned. "Greg thinks he owns this place. Let's make sure he doesn't." It gave me chills. Not because of the words, but because I realized they were right. Greg wasn't just breaking the rules. He was flaunting them. And the rest of us? We were getting angrier by the day. That weekend, things escalated again. I caught Greg dragging another bag to the curb. Janice, who happened to be outside watering her plants, called out, "Hey, Greg. Forget something? Like a trash can?" Greg turned slowly, eyes narrowing. "You really want to start this?" Janice folded her arms. "You already started it. The whole neighborhood's watching." Greg stomped toward her, fists clenched. "You keep running your mouth, and..." I shouted from my porch. "Back off, Greg." He stopped a few feet short, breathing hard. A couple of neighbors peeked out from their windows, phones raised, recording. Greg sneered, dropped the bag with a thud, and stormed back inside. By Sunday night, the HOA's image was in tatters. People were whispering about petitions, recalls, even lawsuits. But the angriest whispers weren't about rules or fines anymore. They were about Greg. Because when a board member makes himself untouchable, and the board covers for him, resentment doesn't just simmer. It explodes. And ours was about to. By Monday morning, the whispers had turned into action. Janice was the first to make a move. She showed up at my door with a clipboard in one hand and a stack of papers in the other. "I'm done waiting for the board to act," she said. "We're starting a petition to censure Greg. If he won't follow the rules, he doesn't deserve his seat." Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with anger. I signed without hesitation. The next neighbor signed too. By noon, half a dozen names covered the page. By evening, the petition had spread across the entire block. The mood in the community shifted. For the first time, people weren't just grumbling, they were uniting. Greg noticed. That night, I saw him outside, dragging his trash bag toward the curb again. But this time, he stopped halfway, glaring across the street where Janice was chatting with another neighbor. "You think you're clever?" he shouted, loud enough for the whole block to hear. "You think your little signatures mean anything?" Janice crossed her arms. "It means we're tired of you treating yourself like royalty while the rest of us pay fines." Greg smirked. "Maybe you should worry about your own garbage. Who knows what I might find in your cans?" It was a threat, thinly veiled. The air grew tense. Neighbors leaned out of windows, watching, phones in hand. Nobody said a word, but everyone knew. This wasn't over. The next morning, Janice woke up to find a black plastic garbage bag dumped right on her driveway. It wasn't hers. She stood over it, fuming, before dragging it into the middle of the street and ripping it open. Inside was nothing but shredded junk mail and empty beer cans. "Set up," she hissed. "Someone's trying to frame me." Neighbors gathered, murmuring. Some pointed at Greg's unit. Others shook their heads. But nobody doubted what had happened. The war had officially gone dirty. By midweek, tension spilled into the open. A group of residents gathered near the mailboxes, signatures piling up on Janice's clipboard. Greg stormed over, face flushed, demanding to see what they were collecting. "You think you can kick me off the board?" he barked. Robert, one of the older residents, held his ground. "We don't think. We know. You're a disgrace to this community. Greg shoved Robert's shoulder. Watch your mouth, old man. Robert shoved back. The two men grappled, shoving and cursing, before neighbors pulled them apart. Mail spilled across the pavement, fluttering like confetti. One resident yelled, "I'm calling the cops." Greg sneered, backing away. "Go ahead. They'll side with me. I am the board." The arrogance in his voice made people boo. That night, HOA management sent an email trying to calm the storm. The board is aware of recent tensions regarding trash violations. We ask residents to remain civil and respectful. Please remember that harassment of board members or neighbors will not be tolerated. Not a word about Greg's repeated violations. Not a word about the petition. It was a slap in the face. By Friday, the petition had gathered over 50 signatures, more than half the community. People who had never spoken to one another were knocking on doors, asking for support. Some whispered they wanted not just Greg out, but Karen and the entire board gone. Still, Greg refused to back down. On Saturday morning, he strutted out with not one, but 2 black garbage bags. He dropped them on the curb with a grin, as if daring someone to stop him. Janice appeared instantly, phone recording. "Smile, Greg. You're going viral." Greg lunged toward her, hand outstretched for the phone. She jerked back, yelling, "Don't touch me." Neighbors poured out of their units, shouting. One man stepped between them, shoving Greg back. Another yelled, "Enough. You're done, Greg." The scene turned into a shouting match, voices echoing off the stucco walls. Dogs barked, kids cried, and someone screamed, "Call the police." The cops arrived minutes later. This time, they didn't just shrug it off. They separated Greg from the crowd, spoke to Janice, and took down names. When Greg stormed back inside his unit afterward, the entire block erupted into cheers. For the first time, it felt like the tide was turning. That night, as I walked past the mailboxes, I saw something scrawled on the bulletin board in thick black marker. "No more double standards. Board out." It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. Because everyone already knew. Greg's days on the board were numbered. But as I headed back to my unit, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get uglier before they got better. The petition had taken on a life of its own. By the time the next monthly HOA meeting rolled around, nearly 2/3 of the community had signed it. People were buzzing in the parking lot before the doors even opened, clutching copies like weapons. Inside, the clubhouse was jammed. Folding chairs filled every inch of the room. People stood shoulder to shoulder along the walls, voices rising in restless anticipation. At the front sat the board. Karen in her usual stiff posture, arms folded tight, and Greg slouched in his chair, smirking like a man who believed he couldn't lose. Karen banged the gavel. "The meeting will now come to order." But order never arrived. Janice stood immediately, waving the clipboard. "We have 58 signatures calling for the removal of Greg from the board. We demand this issue be addressed tonight." The room erupted in cheers and applause. People stomped their feet, clapping and chanting, "Out! Out! Out!" Karen tried to shout over the noise. "This is not on the agenda." Janice fired back. "It's the only thing that matters. You fine us for trash bags, but your board member breaks the rules 3 times a week. Enough is enough." All eyes turned to Greg. He leaned back, grinning. "Maybe you should all spend less time whining and more time cleaning up your own messes." That did it. Robert, the older resident Greg had shoved before, shot out of his chair, pointing a finger at him. "You're a disgrace, Greg. You've embarrassed this community long enough." Greg stood too, puffing out his chest. "Sit down before I put you down." Gasps filled the room. Robert didn't sit. He lunged across the aisle, and suddenly the two men were grappling, shoving each other against the board's table. Papers flew into the air. Karen screamed for order, banging the gavel uselessly as the room exploded. Chaos swallowed the clubhouse. Neighbors shouted, some trying to separate the men, others egging them on. "Throw him out. Get him, Robert. Call the cops." Janice's phone was recording the entire scene, her voice shrill. "Everyone needs to see this. Look at him." Greg, red-faced, ripped free and pointed at her. "Put that damn phone down." When she didn't, he swiped at it, knocking it from her hand. It clattered across the floor. A chorus of boos rained down. "Thug. Resign. Coward." Then came the second shove. This time, it wasn't Robert. It was another resident, a younger man, who pushed Greg square in the chest. Greg stumbled backward into his chair, sending it toppling. He sprang back up, fists clenched, but by then 3 neighbors had surrounded him, holding him at bay. "Get out, Greg," one yelled. "You're finished," shouted another. Karen was nearly in tears, pounding the gavel again and again. "This meeting is adjourned," but nobody listened. Suddenly, a plastic trash bag flew through the air. Someone, nobody ever admitted who, had brought it in from outside. It landed with a wet thud right in front of the board's table, splitting open and spilling old food wrappers and soda cans across the floor. The symbolism was perfect. The room howled with laughter and outrage. Greg screamed over the noise. "You people are animals." Someone shouted back. "Better than being a hypocrite." At that moment, the police arrived. Blue and red lights flashed outside as 2 officers pushed their way through the crowd. "What the hell is going on in here?" one barked. "Everyone tried to talk at once. He threatened me. They're corrupt." He attacked her phone. The officer held up a hand. "Quiet." His partner stepped toward Greg. "Sir, we've had multiple reports of you being physically aggressive. Step outside." Greg's face twisted. "I didn't do anything wrong. They're framing me." But the officers didn't care. They guided him out the door while the crowd erupted in cheers. Outside, I watched through the window as Greg shouted at the officers, waving his arms wildly. They didn't arrest him, but they kept him outside until the meeting dispersed. Inside, the mood was electric. Janice picked up her phone, smiling grimly. "Got the whole thing. The world's going to see what kind of clown we have on this board." Neighbors gathered around her, nodding. Someone whispered, "That video's going viral." Karen tried one last time to regain control. "Everyone needs to calm down," she said, voice trembling. "The board will review the situation and issue a statement." But the crowd wasn't buying it. "No more statements," someone yelled. "We want action," shouted another. "Resign, Karen." The chants grew louder, echoing off the walls. "Resign. Resign. Resign." Karen's face went pale. She stood abruptly, gathering her papers, and hurried out the back door without another word. The meeting ended not with order, but with revolution. That night, the video of Greg's outburst hit the neighborhood Facebook group. By morning, it had been shared outside the community. Comments poured in. "Classic HOA corruption. Unbelievable double standards. Throw him out already." The pressure was mounting. The board could no longer ignore it. But Greg? He wasn't backing down. If anything, he was getting nastier. Because when people in power feel cornered, they don't step aside quietly. They lash out. And Greg was about to. The fallout from the meeting was immediate. Greg had been escorted out by police. Karen had fled through the back door, and the rest of the board sat in stunned silence as residents chanted for resignations. By the next morning, the video of Greg's meltdown was circulating beyond the HOA's private Facebook group. Friends from other neighborhoods were sharing it, laughing at the trash board member who can't follow his own rules. It was humiliating, and Greg knew it. Instead of laying low, he doubled down. The first shot came in the form of garbage. On Tuesday morning, residents along my route woke to find random trash bags dumped in their driveways. Soggy pizza boxes, half-empty soda cans, even a rotting chicken carcass. The smell was atrocious. Janice's driveway got hit the worst. 3 bags split open, spilling garbage down her walkway. She stood outside with her phone, recording as flies buzzed around her ankles. "This is what happens when you cross Greg," she said bitterly. "He can't fight fair, so he fights with trash." Everyone suspected him, but nobody could prove it. Greg had cameras installed on his own property. Of course, nothing ever appeared on his footage. By Wednesday, the community was divided into 2 camps. On one side were the petitioners, furious and ready to remove Greg at any cost. On the other were a handful of Greg's defenders, mostly people who feared fines or simply liked stirring trouble. They claimed the video was edited and accused Janice of harassing a board member. Arguments broke out at the mailboxes, in the parking lot, even at the pool. Neighbors shouted at one another, fingers pointed, insults hurled. "You're enabling corruption. You're running a witch hunt. At least we don't throw trash like children." One confrontation nearly turned violent when Greg himself appeared, smirking as 2 neighbors squared off. He egged them on, muttering, "Go ahead, hit him. See what happens." Police had to be called again. Meanwhile, the petition grew. It wasn't just about Greg anymore, it was about the entire board. Flyers began appearing on doors. "Enough is enough. New leadership now." Someone even set up an online petition, complete with photos of Greg's trash bags and clips from the viral video. Karen tried damage control, sending out an email. "The board is aware of recent misinformation being spread by certain residents. Please be advised that disciplinary matters regarding board members are handled internally. Homeowners are encouraged not to participate in disruptive activities." The email only fueled the fire. Internally, neighbors scoffed. Translation: "They're covering for him." The retaliation escalated. On Thursday night, Janice's car was egged. The next morning, Robert found his trash can tipped over and smeared with something foul-smelling. Others reported anonymous notes taped to their doors. "Stop stirring trouble or pay the price." The atmosphere grew poisonous. Parents kept their kids inside. People stopped walking their dogs after dark. Suspicion hung over every interaction. One neighbor whispered to me, "This isn't a community anymore. It's a war zone." The breaking point came that weekend. A group of petitioners gathered near the clubhouse to compare signatures. Greg stormed over, red-faced and shouting, "You think you can take me down? You're nobodies. I run this place." Janice held up the clipboard. "Not for long. We have the numbers." Greg lunged for it, grabbing the papers. Residents pulled back, tugging. The clipboard snapped, signatures scattering across the pavement. Pandemonium erupted. People screamed. Greg shoved Robert to the ground. Robert's head smacked the concrete with a sickening thud. Neighbors gasped. "Call 911, someone shouted. Phones lit up, recording every second. Greg stood over Robert, shouting, "Stay down, old man," before neighbors dragged him away. An ambulance arrived minutes later. Robert was conscious but shaken, blood trickling down his temple. The paramedics strapped him onto a stretcher, wheeling him out as the crowd watched in stunned silence. Police showed up again, this time questioning Greg aggressively. He shouted, cursed, and claimed he was defending himself. The officers didn't arrest him, but they warned him that charges could follow. The damage was done. The video of the fight spread even faster than the first one. Local news stations picked it up, dubbing it Trash Wars in City, California. Our community was infamous now. The board tried once more to circle the wagons. Karen released another statement. The board regrets the unfortunate altercation that occurred on HOA property. We remind residents that disruptive gatherings without prior approval are prohibited. It was laughable. They weren't addressing Greg's violence or his hypocrisy, just scolding us for daring to meet without permission. People were livid. By Sunday night, the petition had nearly unanimous support. Even Greg's few defenders were silent now, humiliated by his public meltdown. But Greg still refused to resign. Instead, he prowled the parking lot at night, glaring at anyone who passed, muttering insults under his breath. Neighbors whispered about seeing him with bags of trash at odd hours, sneaking around like a saboteur. Fear gripped the community. Nobody felt safe. And everyone knew. The next HOA meeting would be the final showdown. The next HOA meeting was destined to be ugly. Everyone knew it. The parking lot was full long before the doors opened. Neighbors gathered in clusters, whispering furiously, clutching petitions and printed screenshots of Greg's viral videos. The air buzzed with anticipation, like a storm about to break. Inside, the clubhouse was packed shoulder to shoulder. Folding chairs were set up in every corner, but still people stood along the walls. The board sat at the front like nervous royalty facing a mob. Karen looked pale and exhausted. Greg, on the other hand, sat grinning, arms crossed, like a man who believed he was untouchable. Karen banged the gavel. This meeting will come to order. It didn't. Janice stood immediately, her voice ringing out. We have over 80 signatures calling for Greg's removal. That's a majority. We demand a vote tonight. The crowd roared in approval. Chants broke out. Vote. 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 Karen's voice shook. That's not how this works. Removal requires due process. Robert, bandage still wrapped around his head from the last fight, stood shakily and raised his hand. Due process? Greg nearly put me in the hospital. He's disgraced this board. If you won't remove him, then step aside and let us. The room erupted again, neighbors stomping feet, pounding fists on folding tables. Greg finally spoke, his smirk widening. You people think you run this place? You're nothing. Without me, this HOA collapses. Without you, it finally has a chance, Janice shot back. The shouting escalated. Vote him out. He should be in jail. Hypocrite. Greg rose to his feet, shouting over the noise. I'm not going anywhere. You can't touch me. A neighbor near the front yelled. Then we'll drag you out. The room went wild. Chairs scraped, people surged forward, some trying to get to Greg, others trying to hold them back. Karen banged her gavel uselessly, her voice drowned in the chaos. Then it happened. Greg shoved the nearest neighbor, a young man clutching the petition papers. The man stumbled back, knocking over 2 chairs and crashing into another resident. Screams erupted. Several residents lunged at Greg, fists flying. Others tried to separate them, but the fight spilled across the board's table. Papers and pens scattered, coffee splashed, the gavel clattered to the floor. Stop it! Stop! Karen screamed, but her voice was lost in the storm. Phones were raised everywhere, recording every shove, every punch, every curse. The fight turned into a full brawl. One resident grabbed Greg's arm, another swung at him. Greg fought back, red-faced, shouting obscenities. Tables tipped, chairs toppled, people fell in piles on the floor. Someone hurled a water bottle across the room, hitting a board member in the face. "Call the cops," voices screamed. "They're already on the way," shouted another. Moments later, flashing red and blue lights lit up the windows. Police stormed in, shouting commands. "Break it up! Everyone back! Now!" The officers waded into the crowd, pulling bodies apart. One officer pinned Greg against the wall, hand pressed firmly to his chest. Greg shouted furiously, spittle flying, "They're assaulting me. I'm the victim here." The officer snapped back, "Shut it, before we cuff you." The chaos slowly ebbed as neighbors were separated. Some nursed bruises, others shouted angrily at the board. Robert leaned against a wall, breathing heavily, eyes blazing. Janice clutched the torn petition papers, refusing to let go even though half the signatures were smeared and shredded. The head officer addressed the room. "This is the third time we've been called here in 2 weeks. If this continues, someone's going to jail. Do you all understand me?" Silence followed, broken only by heavy breathing and the rustle of papers on the floor. After the officers left, Karen attempted to salvage what was left of the meeting. Her voice trembled, but she pressed on. "The board will consider all of this and issue a formal statement. Until then, this meeting is adjourned." The gavel struck weakly. Nobody applauded. Nobody moved. Finally, Greg stormed out, flanked by 2 silent board members. The crowd parted like an angry tide, glaring as he passed. Someone hissed, "You're finished." Outside, in the humid night air, neighbors gathered in clusters again, buzzing with adrenaline. Some cried. Some laughed bitterly. Some whispered about lawyers, recalls, and the possibility of dissolving the entire HOA. Robert spoke quietly but firmly, "We can't let him win. Not this time." Janice nodded, clutching the shredded petition to her chest. "Then we don't stop until he's gone." The crowd murmured in agreement. For the first time, it felt like the community, broken, bruised, and furious, might actually stand together. But as I walked home, heart still pounding, I couldn't shake the unease in my gut. Greg wasn't done. He had too much pride, too much arrogance. And he had already shown how far he was willing to go. The war wasn't over. It was only escalating. The fight at the meeting had left the community shaken. For days afterward, the clubhouse still smelled faintly of spilled coffee and sweat, and broken chair legs sat in a pile near the dumpster like the wreckage of a battlefield. The video of the brawl, of course, went viral in our city within hours. Local news anchors snickered as they played clips of residents hurling insults, of Greg being pinned to the wall by police, of Janice clutching her torn petition like a trophy. We were infamous now. The trash HOA, as people called us online. But the board wasn't laughing. 3 days later, a letter arrived in everyone's mailbox. It was terse, stamped with the association seal. Effective immediately, the board has engaged legal counsel to investigate the incidents at the most recent meeting. Homeowners are reminded that harassment, defamation, or physical violence toward board members will result in legal consequences. Assessments may increase to cover the costs of legal representation. Translation: We were paying for their lawyers again. The outrage was immediate. They caused the chaos, and we foot the bill? This is extortion. They want to bankrupt us into silence. The mood turned darker than ever. Meanwhile, Greg prowled the neighborhood like a cornered animal. He strutted past driveways with his arms crossed, sneering at anyone who dared meet his eyes. He muttered insults under his breath, sometimes loud enough for phones to catch on recording. One afternoon, I caught him dragging yet another trash bag to the curb. He locked eyes with me and smirked. "What are you gonna do? Call the trash police?" I didn't answer. But Janice, standing nearby, snapped a photo and posted it online. Within an hour, it had 100 comments. "Still breaking rules. Still untouchable." Then came the retaliation. Janice's garage door was spray painted with the word "rat" in thick black letters. Robert found dog feces smeared on his front step. Another petitioner woke up to find nails scattered across his driveway. Nobody said Greg's name, but everybody thought it. The community descended into paranoia. Neighbors installed cameras, floodlights, even motion sensors. Every creak at night set dogs barking. Every shadow felt like an intruder. The sense of safety was gone. Finally, the residents decided enough was enough. A group of us pooled money to hire our own lawyer. Not to sue the HOA, yet, but to demand accountability. He sent a letter to the board, sharp and precise. Failure to enforce rules consistently constitutes breach of fiduciary duty. Harassment and intimidation of homeowners by a board member may result in personal liability. Immediate removal proceedings are demanded. The letter hit like a thunderclap. For the first time, the board looked rattled. At the next meeting, the clubhouse was guarded by 2 police officers stationed at the door. Inside, the atmosphere was icy. Karen spoke in a low, careful voice. "The board has reviewed legal counsel's recommendations. Effective today, Greg has been censured for conduct unbecoming of a board member. He will no longer hold voting privileges." The room erupted in applause and jeers. Some cheered. Others shouted, "Not enough. Kick him out completely." Greg sat stone-faced, his jaw tight, but for once, he said nothing. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was the first crack in his armor. But the damage was done. The community was fractured. Some residents were exhausted, desperate to move on. Others were hungry for full revenge. Petitions shifted focus. Not just to remove Greg, but to recall Karen and the entire board. Flyers demanded a full election. Online forums buzzed with talk of dissolving the HOA entirely. One neighbor summed it up: "We didn't sign up to live in a war zone." Weeks dragged on. Mold, trash, petty fines. These problems still existed, but nobody cared anymore. The only issue was power. Greg eventually resigned under mounting pressure, but he didn't go quietly. His farewell email was a rant, accusing us all of being ungrateful children, and warning that the community would collapse without him. Maybe he was right, because even after he left, the wounds remained. Today, walking through the neighborhood feels like walking through ruins. Lawns are trimmed, cars are parked neatly, but the warmth is gone. Neighbors avoid eye contact. Parents no longer let their kids ride bikes in groups. Every conversation carries an edge, a trace of suspicion. The HOA still exists, technically. Karen clings to her role, though whispers of another recall swirl. Special assessments loom to cover legal costs, and resentment simmers under every roof. We may have removed Greg, but we didn't remove the rot. As for me, I keep thinking back to the first letter, the one about garbage bags. Such a small thing, such a petty rule. And yet, from that single reminder notice, we spiraled into petitions, fights, vandalism, police calls, and viral infamy. A community destroyed over trash.
Thanks for watching this story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more unbelievable HOA stories. Have you ever dealt with something this absurd in your own neighborhood? Share your experience in the comments below. I'd love to read your stories. And as always, stay tuned for the next episode.